We are in the midst of a fascinating chapter of the synthesis of yoga, where Sri Aurobindo is laying out the framework of the various planes of existence and describing not only what gives them their distinct qualities, but also how they relate to each other. In the portion we have just covered, going back a few weeks, Sri Aurobindo described the characteristic of the physical plane, matter, the thing which we are most familiar with, and which to us is the only universe. And the character of this is that it is a world of form, rigid, fixed, unmoving, not flexible, and very objectivized as a result. Everybody who has physical sight will share the common experience of the flower because it is a world of form and it is form that we share. But what we don't share is the life element of it, which is to us hidden in the form. Is the flower living or is it a plastic flower? And sometimes you can't be sure. What you cannot share is our experience of the consciousness which is in the flower. Each one registers these things differently, if at all we register it. Otherwise, to most of us, it's just a form. Is it plastic? Is it real? I'm not sure. Maybe if it's shiny, it looks more plastic. But if you shift level to go a little deeper and begin to see and experience life force, looking at the flower, you will see not only its physical form, but you will directly experience its life energy. You will directly experience the consciousness which is in it. And by that you would know whether it's plastic or real flower. When we meet each other, we look at our forms. We look at the face particularly, and looking at the face we say, you're looking tired, or you're looking worried. What is bothering you? We cannot feel, we cannot know what's happening inside the person's life energy, why he's tired, or his emotions, what he's feeling, or even what he's thinking. The person, if he puts up a sufficiently deceptive form, he can hide the most contrary thought or intention, and you would not know because we know only the form, and that is our shared experience of the physical world. But if you go up one level, there is the world of life force, which is life force first. Matter is not there, it is secondary. And it is fluid of form, because form is not important here. It is the quality of life energy which makes it distinct. And in the life force, in the life world, if we were to meet each other, we would instantly experience what the other person feels and the quality of their life energy, whether it is fresh or it is tired, whether it is happy or it is unhappy. You would experience it as intimately as you experience your own, because life energy is not bound inside a form. So when you meet somebody in your dream state in the vital world, what they feel and experience is instantly felt by you, in you, as intensely as if it was happening in you. The result is often in the dream, we have this very strange feeling that the person comes and then I don't remember any words spoken, but I knew what he was feeling, I knew what he was thinking, because it is instantly experienced. The realm of the life world, the vital world, is so fundamentally different. And even more different is the mind world, which we have not yet come to. So in the last sessions, Sri Aurobindo described the character of the life world as distinct from the physical world, and you will recall, first of all, that it is a world of desire and satisfaction of impulse. Even it can be called a desire world. Everything there is life energy and impulse of life energy, seeking its own satisfaction and fulfillment. And naturally, because it is free of form, there's greater fluidity, one can represent things differently. If you give a stone to somebody, the life energy of the stone is so distinct from its forms. You take two pebbles, the difference in appearance may be very little, but the difference in life force may be so great. And a person who's sensitive to that, even in the physical world, will sense the life energy. I don't think I mentioned this as an example. In the Tibetan tradition, when they try to recognize a Lama who is reincarnated, there are several stages to the recognition. For example, if it is the Dalai Lama has passed away, before he leaves his body, he gives some indications of what will be the kind of environment that they might find him. And after about 2 years, the senior monks start going around looking for either signs or some hint. Sometimes they have images which come in meditation or in dream state, and then they go looking for that place. Having recognized a house, they discover there's a child which was born 2 years ago. So now the next step is it that child? Is it that Dalai Lama? And so one of the senior monks will go disguised as a servant to live in the house, work there, and get a feel of the child. And after all the subjective evidence has been satisfied, there will be an objective test. They will tell the parents, look, it looks like your child might be incarnation of somebody, we know. And so they take the child into a room where there is a mix of objects used by the previous Dalai Lama and similar objects used by other people, and perhaps even new, fresh-looking, attractive, glittering objects. So a normal child will be attracted to glittering things. But if it is the reincarnation of that soul, then that child goes straight to the object which was used by the previous incarnation. Why? Because he feels the energetic affinity, similarity. Not the physical form, but the content of life force in it is what attracts. Among human beings, those who are much more sensitive on this level of life energies often struggle with this. Almost it's a problem for them. We have a word for it, we call them empaths. Empath because they feel empathy very easily, sometimes overwhelmingly. So meeting somebody, often they will experience the other person's emotions as intensely as if their own. And this is because at the level of the vital body, they are extremely sensitive, or their protection is weak, or their physical nervous system is weak, and so any imprints on the vital body are intensely registered, whatever the cause. The point is they feel almost as if they were meeting directly in the vital world, but it is still in the physical body. These examples give us some sense of what it could be like being in the vital world, in a vital body, but still what it does not lead us to recognize is form there is fluid. And form being fluid, the way you relate to something determines the kind of form that it appears to you as. If for me something is very important, it will appear big. If I set up a relationship of less importance, of no interest, it will become small or even far. So, sitting across the table with a friend, if your mind is elsewhere, you do not feel the energetic closeness. So in terms of the vital energy, you are far away. And this is what happens in the vital world and in your dream experience. In the dream, you remember somebody and instantly, the person is there, or you have gone close to them. Because affinity is in terms of energetic quality. But we also saw, because it is a world of desire, it is full of both positive and negative desire experiences. All the hells as well as the lower heavens all belong to the vital world. We read in detail some of Mother's descriptions of the vital world, and we will look at a few more today. But in the portion we are at now, in this paragraph, Sri Aurobindo describes the relationship between the vital and the physical world. And as a quick recapitulation, we look at a few important statements he makes. First, that the two are as if existing in each other. The vital world is not somewhere else, it is right here, but as if a different grade of reality. But between the two, there is an interdependence. In fact, he says the material world is a kind of a projection of the vital world, throwing out to separate from itself a dense, crude, formed experience into which then it wants to enter to experience what that is like. And so, between the relationship of the two, the physical world is often dependent on the vital, but the vital has an interest in participation in the physical. And so it is that interest or the pressure from the life world on earth, physical matter, which produces life in matter, the plant, and then eventually living beings, animals, human beings, etc. A third important point was that our vital body, as it is embedded in the physical body, is like the surfaced most projection of that vital consciousness. Our vital body itself opens out on a deeper level, at a subliminal level, to the inner, wider vital world, where it is much larger and more free. And so, our experience even of life energies is very limited and largely dulled by the identification with the physical body. And when we can detach ourselves, when we can step back into the free vital body, we can have much more free experience not only of the vital world, but even its universality and the worlds within the vital, the different planes, multiple planes, because the vital is so much more fluid. In the next sentence, which we have already touched last time, but which we will explore more deeply, he says, the life world is constantly acting upon us, and behind everything in material existence, there stand appropriate powers of the life world. And we saw that in some detail last time. There are beings who preside, vital energies which preside over physical processes. And then he says, even the most crude and elemental have behind them elemental life powers, elemental beings by which or by whom they are supported. And so we saw examples of this last time, including beings who preside over plants, plant processes, microclimates, and even larger climatic changes. But one thing which I wanted to touch upon is that when we look at elemental beings, particularly in many of the European occult traditions, they give great importance to going to the essential elements or elemental beings, which are as if the precursor of other elemental beings. And in the tradition, you know that they speak of 5 elements. 4 elements generally in the Greek tradition, 5 elements in the Eastern or particularly Indian tradition. And these 5 as if compose all other substances. Now this is true not only in the physical world, but it is true equally in the vital world. So one of the objectives of some of these occult schools in Europe is to develop the mastery over all 4 elements. And that means to develop mastery or establish some relationship of seeming mastery with the beings who represent the 4 elements. So they will go through certain rituals and practices in order to enter in relation with the earth element and acquire some kind of mastery, which having got, they will actually be able to have influence over physical objects to some extent. Then the water element and the master elemental being of water, and then of fire, and then of air. Having mastered them, they will have some control over these 4 processes, including water, air, moisture, and so on, fire particularly. I remember reading once an experience which somebody had documented. It was part of the theosophical literature because they were done a lot of research and documentation in this field of occultism. And I recall reading there somebody who was doing the mantra of the fire elemental being, and it was his routine, he was doing it for years. And then one day he describes how the flame which was before him, lamp or candle, suddenly began to grow intense and large, and then suddenly it grew and as if overwhelmed him, surrounded him, and penetrated into him. And the result was, he said, after that, it was as if the fire elemental being itself had joined with him, and he did not need any more the mantra. In the tradition, they say it is mantra siddhi, it is realization of the power of the mantra. And after that, he found he had a certain affinity with the fire itself, and I don't remember what it was in his case, but often the form it takes is that the person can put their hand in fire and not be burnt, or they can invoke fire on a piece of paper and have it light with a mantra or simply by intending it. Things like that, which are basic powers over the fire process in the physical world. Things like that are greatly valued in some of these occult traditions. But what you can see is primarily behind that their objective is to gain some sort of control, and by gaining control of the being behind, you gain control over the processes that the being presides over or influences. Now, having looked at some of these examples and the many more that we saw last time, we move to the next line. Sri Aurobindo says, the influences of the life world are always pouring out on the material existence and producing their powers and results, which return again upon the life world to modify it. We saw last time not only the many kinds of influence, but also how that return takes place. And we saw how, based on this idea, there are all kinds of magical incantations and processes. And in particular, we took reference to perfumes or fire and the rising smoke of fire as one of the ways by which an influence from the physical world can be extended into the vital world. When properly done, let's say a combination of perfumes, colors, forms, objects, and lit fire with certain objects put into it, it creates a certain quality of life force or consciousness which attracts beings of that vibration, or even if there's a strong intention put into it, it can compel or summon certain energies of that grade. And in the vital world, it's as if there is an accumulation of all these energies or forces. In the physical world, there is immediately the physical effect of that accumulation. So, as a quick example, you will notice in the Indian tradition, they give great importance to the eclipse. And often the eclipse is considered to be a time of impurity. So temples will close their gates. Food which is exposed to air during the eclipse should be discarded, and fresh food made after, and so on. People in the spiritual tradition are advised to practice a mantra because they say the mantra grows greater in force and power when you repeat it during the eclipse time. Now you'll notice all of these relate to things of the vital world. Of the nature of pure spirituality, it does not matter. If spirituality and spiritual energies could be modified by positions of planets, then it would not be a power of the self. It would be a power of the planet. But a power of the self necessarily transcends all such phenomena. What is influenced by such phenomena is the domain of the vital and to some extent the mental worlds, especially the realms of the mental which are under influence of the vital. So what happens? One of the strange things we observed during the eclipse is that the bacteria count in the air shoots up. Even it has been documented, and these are scientific measurements, unquestioned, that the bacteria count can triple during the eclipse. Now consider the logic of it. Scientists will say, that's because the air is not having enough of the sun's ultraviolet rays which normally kill the bacteria. So the count goes up because the sunlight is blocked by the moon. But think about it. If this is true, then at night the bacteria count should shoot up far more. It does not happen. Or if there's a very thick cloud which blocks even the ultraviolet rays, the bacteria count should shoot up. It does not happen. There is a very different phenomena taking place at the time of the eclipse, and which is measured in its most physical result by the bacteria count going up. And what this is that that particular alignment, although seen physically in terms of astral bodies, well, those bodies are called astral because they have vital components. They represent also alignments of energies of the vital and physical world, and in fact, the link between the physical and vital world thins, or the gap between them thins, and the link becomes more distinct. So influences of the vital come into the physical more easily. And this is the reason why you will find animals get agitated during the eclipse. The sun may be covered up by clouds, the dogs won't bark or get upset. But when it's covered by the moon, even if the picture is covered by clouds and you're not able to see the eclipse, they sense its effect. And you'll find dogs suddenly sitting down, either behaving strange or howling, and other birds either go completely silent or they make exaggerated sounds. And that's because they sense this impending pressure from the vital world and they are uncomfortable. And beings of the vital world at that time can often have access to the physical forms more easily, and animals sense that. It's also the time when they say black magic is more effective for this reason, because you're trying to bring those beings. But what about that advice that you do your mantras? Well, there are two sides to that. The repetition of the mantra acts perhaps as a protection because you're invoking a higher purpose or intention, but also because at that time the vital energies associated with the mantra can be regenerated and built up. And this is true particularly of mantras which engage with energies which are more of the vital than of the pure spiritual. Mantras which are used particularly for healing or for some magical interventions and so on. So this is just to give you an example of how the influences of that world and the physical world have also more complex rhythms and patterns. And from the physical arrangements, there are connections back, and from there forward, and there is a constant interchange. And Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary here is, the influences of the life world are always pouring out on the material existence, and from the material again returning back. So there's a constant interchange taking place. And particularly, a great focal point of that interchange is wherever there are living things. Plants have a tremendous influence because they are literally vital representations in the physical world. So if you plant a few plants, the plant's physical realm influences the vital world in that region. It calls beings which correspond to the plants. So the plants will call for the rain. And it attracts those beings who then create the weather patterns around the plant to produce the rain. But if you do something which disturbs those beings and they run away because of the disturbance, then suddenly you find the rains have stopped. What could that be? Well, often human intervention. Human beings living there, creating a very chaotic or repulsive atmosphere, will drive out these beings which are often far too sensitive to bear the coarseness of human life. Or if you have, for example, some of those very damaging human activities, poisoning the environment, or exploding bombs or crackers, or nuclear weapons. These have extremely disturbing influences which ripple through not only in the physical world, across even links between planets and in the solar system, but across the vital worlds. You will recall the mother's experience when she said one morning she got up and there was this horrible stench in the air. And she saw it was not a physical thing, it was in the subtle physical. And so she went to investigate and found that the Chinese had exploded a nuclear bomb very close to the border of India. And then she said it took her 2 hours of continuous effort to contain what had been spread by that explosion and to remove it in order to protect, well, life forms, humanity, everything, not only in the physical but even in the subtle physical and the vital domains. And you can see how unknowingly human beings do such stupid things. And if there are benevolent beings, they intervene to try to limit the damage that we do. But we continue to do them, oblivious of how much trouble we create for higher beings to try to limit the harm that we are causing, not only to ourselves, but to all life around. You will notice that ever since humanity began to explode atom bombs, particularly in the open air, there has been a huge disturbance in the climate. There have been huge poisonings of the atmosphere. Life patterns on Earth have been greatly harmed, and some of it we are just beginning to recognize. But this is only one side of it. The point being, there is a continuous interdependence. As the life form becomes more and more complex, the interdependence is more obvious. So a plant, because it represents a particular quality of life energy, becomes like a link point with the vital world or the lowest parts of the vital world for that quality of energy. A different plant for a different quality of energy. This becomes the basis for the vital energetic quality associated with plants and their medicinal value or their magical value. So you will see that certain plants are associated with magical processes for certain kinds of invocations. How do they know? Well, from this particular quality which the physical body of the plant actually embodies, and you bring that into effect and you're actually pulling that quality of life force. In one of the particular plants, by the way, which is used in certain kinds of magic in Europe, it's called Hollywood. And it's not by chance that this place called Hollywood, which is the center of American cinema, it's not by chance that it is called Hollywood. It was done with an intention. It was meant to create a space where they could create a kind of a magical, hypnotic influence through cinema on the rest of, well, humanity eventually. And there are other plants, one of which is called mandrake, which is used for certain types of influence. But all of these magical uses, you will notice, correspond also to medicinal uses, because finally you are tapping into that life energy. Consider that within your own physical body, every organ has a particular function, but if you look at what it represents energetically or what it manifests from the vital body into the physical, you recognize the particular operation of or quality of life energy associated with it. The heart, for example, has the operation of pumping, pushing fresh life force, drawing back also to some extent the faded or depleted life energies, but then regenerating and pushing out fresh life energy. That is its primary object in function in the body. Because the physical body is in the domain of matter and therefore domain of form, the form has to operate through so many veins, arteries, etc. But in the vital body, you do not have those rigid veins and arteries. There the life energy simply glows out. Now you notice something interesting. If here in the center of the chest, which is where the center of the life force spreading out is rooted, if there you're unhappy, what happens? Your life energy depletes. You do not have the same freshness. If there you're happy and optimistic and positive, the life energy swells up, pours out much more. Now you can simply recognize that functioning find that equivalent pattern in plants or trees or crystals and say, here is medicine for this functioning or this operation of life force. Go further down into the digestive systems, you will find, for example, the liver is has its primary function is purifying, but also in particular coordinating the whole digestion process. And again, you will find equivalent roots, herbs, plants. If within the liver functions there are 2 or 3 aspects to the function, like I said, purifying is one aspect, coordinating is another aspect, then you might have specialized herbs for each of these aspects. Depending on the kind of illness you have, you can energize your body for correction with that energy of the herb ingested either as food or applied externally even as a poultice, and it will have a similar effect. The idea is you have physical, let's say, containers of different qualities of vital energies in plants. Now extend this a step. In animals where the organs are organized, you will have similar, much more conscious formulations of the life energy, which then you will see is the root of many of the healing systems that draw on animal organs. Particularly in Chinese medicine, certain parts of the bodies of different organs are given great importance for that quality. But you need not have gone to the animal level. You could have also managed with the plant. But well, the logic is the same. Take it one more step. In your human body, which is one of the most complex, one of the most complete representations of different energy qualities, all essential energy tendencies, types are represented. And so within you there are parts which resonate with different parts or aspects of the vital world. Even we can say they resonate with certain worlds of the vital world. And interestingly, that whole range of gradations of vital worlds or grades of consciousness are mapped from throat down up to the belly, different levels, gradations of consciousness, and even their specialized functions. What that means is we are almost, as a symbol, a near complete symbol, not only of the physical world, because we have a physical body with physical grades of consciousness and powers represented, but of the vital world and the many layers within them, and then from the neck above, even of the mental worlds, and above the head, still higher spiritual worlds, which are not so organized for our current evolution. But here we are, an individualized physical body form with a vital body and mental body, in whom all these gradations of consciousness are represented, and literally parts of our physical body resonate with those levels of consciousness. Taking this logically to its next step, it means by concentrating on certain parts of your body, by putting certain parts of your body in certain arrangements or alignments, you can connect with those energies, activate those energies, dim those energies, or redirect those energy flows. And you can see how obviously this becomes the basis for a whole science, one of the forms of which is the science of mudras. In India, they teach you many different postures of the hands, which have certain particular symbols or results. Of course, the primary utility as it is taught today is for healing. They'll say, this mudra will increase heat, that mudra will bring coolness, this will activate your liver, that will relax your heart. But it's much more than that, much more profound than that. Every finger representing a particular quality or a particular aspect of life energy or consciousness and its functions, aligning fingers, joining them, putting them in particular arrangements can produce distinct results. If nothing else, you see how the 5 fingers, they are 5, corresponding to 5 elements, obviously. And the thumb particularly is corresponding to the part of the mind which is representing will, volition, intentionality. Other fingers representing other aspects. And so the willpower, your thumb aligned with the index finger, will produce a certain result. Aligned with the middle finger produces a different result, and so on. Combinations of these similar would have different effects. You can build a whole science around it. But you could also step back from it and say, well, if it's a grade of consciousness finally, it doesn't matter what my fingers are. I can directly experience that grade of consciousness and intensify it within me as a radiance, or invoking from the life world to energize myself and achieve the same result. This would be the more direct approach of spiritual development. But given that this connection with the physical body exists, you can see how anybody with no understanding, with no experience of the vital world or these deeper realities, can simply be told, do this and you will have a benefit. It becomes a formula. And the formulas are useful, but they operate in a very limited function. The same result could be attained much more directly by direct intervention of conscious intention, and especially when aligned with a spiritual invocation, you could achieve far more, 100 times or 1,000 times more. So for example, you can be told, take this position and it will calm your mind with your fingers. Okay, you can do it, it will help. But the same thing you could do with a conscious invocation of the divine peace and calm, and you will feel it maybe 10 or 100 times more powerfully. Or somebody else who already lives in that peace could simply invoke it and bring and establish it just like that by willing it, and it would be 1,000 times more powerful. This is how you will see a spiritual center is created. You will recall Mother's promise when Auroville was begun. Remember, she was at that time already aged 90. And that's when she is initiating a project which will take decades to develop. And she said, build the Matra Mandir, and I take it upon myself to make it one of the most powerful spiritual centers on earth. Now, she's saying that at the age of 90, 91 or 92 even. And of course, she's there, so she has done her part. But for that purpose, she did not need any rituals, she did not need any techniques, she didn't need any incantations or mantras or fire, wood put into fire, or any of these devices which belong to the realm of the physical, vital, occult exploration. A simple spiritual consciousness drawing upon the highest, bringing it down, imprinting it and fixing it into the physical space. And that's it, the work is done. So simple, so direct, and so much more powerful. And because it is primarily a spiritual power, it does not matter whether there is an eclipse or not. Because the power is also among one of the highest powers, an individual human being going there and offering a prayer or sitting in concentration cannot sully it, cannot dilute it, cannot affect or pollute it. That is so much greater. But this is not true of a temple in which the primary configuration for invocation was occult. There, the power that is invoked, although of a spiritual character, still is a limited power, a limited aspect. And there, when a few hundred people or 1,000 people bring their problems and their elements of, let's say, confusion and clutter of energies, the temple has to go through a kind of a ritual purification daily, and then sometimes a large purification every 12 years, or depending on the particular temple or deity, at certain intervals. And it has to be closed at the time of impurity of the eclipse or other such events. But for a pure spiritual action, none of these matter. I'm going into some detail with these examples because it helps us also become clear of the difference. It also helps us understand what is at the basis for many of these beliefs, practices, and I will even use the word sciences, because there is a very definite and clear, organized, replicable, verifiable body of knowledge and phenomena associated with some of these things at least. And understanding what is behind them, we get free of wrong understanding or superstition, as Sri Aurobindo puts it. Superstition is only wrong understanding. There is a principle behind. But when you wrongly understand that is superstition, we get free of distorted or false phenomena and the clumsy dealings associated with many of these things, all of which Sri Aurobindo will refer to later on in the paragraph. But this is just the reason for going into some detail of these things. But I come back to the idea that the human body is the most complete, let's say, antenna of all these levels of consciousness. And so within us, it's as if every part is somehow connected to those levels or those powers in the cosmos. We are a microcosm. And the importance for application of this knowledge we have discussed, but I'm looking now at the future. What does it mean for the future? Remember, nothing in the human body has been created by chance. It's as if nature is looking towards some great future possibility of a divinized body. And so from the very beginning, she has been as if accumulating, looking at something in the future, accumulating as if representations of everything from the universe. The whole cosmos is being represented in this microcosm, still under development. What it means eventually, as the human body becomes fully divinized, the human body now living in a consciousness supramental, which knows its oneness with the whole universe, which knows its relation with all these planes of consciousness, the human body itself physically will experience its oneness with the whole cosmos, even as it will act in a center of individuality. It will experience things happening in the universe and on other planes as if they are on some level, in some way happening in it. But also what it will and choose to act within it will resonate and influence events in the universe or across planes. And this is one of those possibilities which belongs still to the next step in human evolution, for which things are still in active development. So these are some of the implications which come from this statement Sri Aurobindo makes. The influences of the life world are always pouring out on the material existence and producing their powers and results, which return again upon the life world to modify it. And this now we see is true of all the planes, and especially of the spiritual. And in the human body, all this is represented. Sri Aurobindo now comes to the focus of us and our human body, and particularly our life energy body, the Pranamaya Kosha. From that is life world, from that, the life part of us, the desire part, is being always touched and influenced. From the life world, our life part, our desire part, is always touched and influenced. What does it mean? Everything happening in the vital world is having an influence on what? The part of you which is vitally formed, vitally resonating, the desire part of us. Not only touched, but there's a constant influence. What's the difference? Influence is when, let's say somebody is happy, he comes into your environment, there's an influence, and you also find yourself uplifted and happy. Or the reverse, they are unhappy, you find yourself after a while suddenly unhappy for no reason. There was an influence. But the influence means you found your own way of being unhappy or happy. Touched is different. It's as if something of that consciousness enters you, touches you, influences you, and actively makes you of its character. So in an influence, there's a direction placed, but the particular form of it depends on your nature. But when there's a touch, there's an active push, contact, and a direct influence trying to make you of its grade. So when you watch, when you read newspapers, watch television, you are influenced to become pessimistic. But each person finds their own way to become pessimistic. Some people say, oh yeah, this is a declining phase of the world. Somebody says, oh, what will happen to the future? I am feeling unhappy. They're different. But when from that reading something comes and touches you, it as if influences, seizes you in a more direct way, and it corresponds to something which has entered you, which is not yours. And that can be sometimes disturbing. So Sri Aurobindo is pointing to both. The desire part in us is being always touched and influenced. You are not conscious, but always 24 hours this is happening. And the next half of the sentence, there too are beneficent and malefic powers of good desire and evil desire, which concern themselves with us even when we are ignorant of and unconcerned with them. Now, these two things he has put with a semicolon separating them. That means we are expected to see the whole thing in one big perspective, but with two facets. So in the first half, he's speaking of influences and touch from the life world, but without specifying what. And that's because you enter a space, the life energy of that space influences you. But it's not influencing with an intention. If the life energy there is a bit dark or low, you enter there, you feel dark or low, but it's not as if that space or the energy there wanted to make you feel that. But the second half of the sentence, he is referring to beings, powers which are conscious, benefic and malefic powers, good desire and evil desire, which concern themselves with us. They take interest, they look for you, they pursue you, they chase after you and want to do something, both good and bad, both types are there. Both good desire and evil desire, even when we are ignorant of and unconcerned with them. You can say, I don't care. You can say, I'm not aware. It makes no difference to them. They can still get to you and put their influence in you. Now, this is a part which we need to now be very concerned about. Because if we really knew what was happening, we would be very unhappy that so much of what we do, so much of what we feel, so many of the impulses which we cherish as impulses made by free choice were actually provoked by these beings. And they look for you. They try to influence you. Why? Suppose you're part of a crowd. You're a group visiting a place. Let's say you're 20 people. You go to one of these old chateaus where perhaps you're visiting the dungeon, where at some point people were tortured or jailed. Unhappiness, heaviness, sadness, suffering is imprinted in the air. You go there and you come out feeling heavy, dull, unhappy, whatever. Some people more than others. Why? Because they're more sensitive, obviously. But that's not all. Those who are more sensitive, or those who have a natural tendency to that kind of mood, the energy there, or if it is a conscious energy, it will seize on those people or target them more with a greater interest. If you have an affinity to those beings, or the interest or type of vibration of those beings, they look for you much more, because they say, here's someone who's like us. So if the desire there was looking for a desire of vengeance, and among those 20, here are two people who have naturally a tendency for anger and vengeance. They think in those patterns. That energy of vengeance which the suffering prisoners had seizes upon them. And they come out suddenly highly activated or excited, but maybe for something totally different. Nothing to do with that domain. Or they come out having heard the story of how people suffered. Blaming the religion, blaming the kings, blaming whatever political systems, this should be destroyed, whatever the form of vengeance that comes up. Not realizing that that whole thing which has possessed them was not their free choice. And if you showed it to them, they would immediately say, no, but I don't want to be a victim of these powers. I don't want to be a tool in their hands. But if this is true of negative desires or energies, it is equally true of positive. There are beings of the vital world, positive, beneficent, who will say, I want to do good on earth. And they find somebody with similar ambition and they seize on them and work through them. There are many famous healers in history who had spontaneously some power that came, or some event as a result of which the power awoke. They did a lot of good perhaps, but they themselves seem to have no knowledge of what they do. It is the vital being associated with them which is working through them to achieve intervention or healing. Depending on their goodness, it may be purely to help, but the vital being, remember, is a being of desire. So the drive, even if it wants to do good, has an expectation. And so it wants to build a movement, it wants to build a following, it wants to create fame or whatever form it takes. There's a very interesting observation Sri Aurobindo makes. Somebody asks him, what is the work of the beings of the vital world? And he says, to create movements. And he gives some examples. We need not look at that, but almost every movement you will find, suddenly out of the blue, there is a whole popularity which grows around it, and it dramatically explodes, suddenly comes into the news, grows rapidly, and often with that also, after a while exhausts itself, and suddenly it fades, gradually fades out, or collapses in one massive scandal, and it's gone, blown over. And this is typically of the character of vital beings. And even if it is a vital being which wanted to do good, this is the way it ends up, depending on the grade of consciousness, the kind of desire or quality of energy it brought. If it is of the lower grade, it makes a bang and then a bust. A higher grade is more detached, more impersonal, more wide, less selfish, and so it may have a more lasting impact, but generally it fades away over time. As you will see, many of the famous movements which began 100 years ago have begun to diminish. Some of them are now practically gone. The vital force which was pushing their expansion has lost its impulsion, and the movement also collapses with it. Only something which is created from a spiritual inspiration will have the character of eternity and infinity, because that's the nature of the spiritual consciousness. And so it's not a movement. It has neither the bang nor the bust, but a steady growth, a steady spread among those who have an affinity with the spiritual, and so it spreads. Many people have asked, and often they come up with this comparison. Sri Aurobindo, it was 100 years ago, he did so much. Why is it that he is not so famous? Why is it that this has not become such as one of those popular movements? And the reason behind that is this. Any spiritual effort will be like this. It will not have the bang and bust. It will have only a steady growth of in that part of humanity aligned to and with that affinity, which is looking for a deeper spiritual touch. But the large part of humanity which is religiously oriented, although they may say spiritual, is looking for precisely that kind of attraction and flash, bright lights, dramatic influences and so on. I want to refer to two movements which are recent relatively. They're a few decades old, but they have millions of followers. One of them is in one of the Eastern countries, and their founder is a woman, at least current founder, and the way it works, they have gigantic hall. I think they hold tens of thousands of people in a single space, and then their founder descends from above, or she rises from below the ground in a kind of a lift, wearing certain clothing which is radiant. And they say that at times when she appears, there are flecks of gold which materialize. And this is again typical of that kind of miraculous intervention characteristic of the vital world. The mother has two conversations regarding this, which I want to read from, and it's interesting to understand this more deeply, here somebody asks the mother, about one of the earlier talks which she gave about the vital world, which we had actually read, I think 3 weeks ago. And in response to that, after mother hears that, she says, to begin with, I said that the vital is peopled by small entities, small formations, the remnants of human beings who have died, but there is a whole vital world which has nothing to do with that one. A world peopled by beings of the vital proper, beings of great power and even great beauty. Most people who dabble in occultism without having a deep enough spiritual life are immediately deluded by them. Some, that is those beings, some even take them, or some people even take them, the beings, as the supreme God and worship them. That's generally how religions are created. They are a great success. They are the supreme God of many a religion. They are beings of the vital world and can assume an appearance of overwhelming beauty. They are the biggest impostors in the world, and dangerous at that. It takes the spiritual instinct, the instinct of true spiritual purity, not to be deceived by them. Many religions and sects are founded on revelations and miracles, and every bit of it comes from vital beings. It's one of the greatest problems in human life. I don't mean spiritual life, but the life of people who deal with the beyond. There are skies, not heavens, in the vital world that are truly paradises. Naturally, the real divine element is lacking. But only spiritual purity and the true spiritual sense can show you the difference. All who remain within the vital or mental worlds are completely deluded. They see marvelous things, miracles in profusion. That's where you find the most miracles, in the vital. By neglecting to explain this aspect in that talk which Mother had, Mother says, I passed over a large part of the topic in silence. I usually don't speak of those things or else mention them only in passing. Why? She says, it terrifies people and they immediately start wondering, oh, is it really a God? Is it this? Is it that? Could it be devil in disguise? They panic. Only, it's perfectly true that to deal with those realms, one must be either be fully protected by a guru, a real guru, a man with knowledge, or else have purity, not saintliness, and unmixed vital and mental purity. Very, very often, bhaktas, devotees of Sri Aurobindo or me, when they are sincere, truly sincere, that is, people of great spiritual purity, have dozens of beings appear to them saying, I am Sri Aurobindo. It happens all the time with all the right external appearances. It's very easy for such beings to put on a disguise. It takes the inner psychic purity not to be deceived. So the point Mother makes here, for them to put on a disguise. Remember, in the vital world, form is fluid. Any being can take on any form. So if you invoke a vital being of a low order and say, I am invoking, being can appear before you taking on that form and tell you whatever you want to hear. How will you know the difference? In fact, this is what happens in most of these occult seances. There was a great excitement around these things 100 years ago in Europe, and there are some interesting letters of Sri Aurobindo relating to those things. But in the theosophical literature, similarly, there's a lot of material exposing the seances. What happens in the seance? The medium goes into a trance, And then people who are sitting there, they are made to hold hands or whatever. And then a form appears, even materializes. And somebody in the audience recognizes, yes, this is my great-grandmother or my grandmother or somebody who's recently died. The form speaks to them, tells them things, answers their questions, and then the form vanishes. Then another form comes in response to someone else's call. His uncle, relative, friend who has died appears, answers questions. And so they explain in the theosophical literature, actually the being behind it is the same one being. It doesn't, what's the point of having different forms and different beings come when anyway it has nothing to do with the person you called? So you can even say, I called upon Napoleon, and you'll have Napoleon appear. But it's the same being who just puts on different images. And where do they get the image? From within your own mind. So you remember the person that you wanted to speak to, they pick the image from your mind, put it on like a mask on their form, and appear to you, and you say, yes, it's the same person. And then in answer to your questions, they answer exactly what you expect to hear, so you go back perfectly satisfied. Of course, the trick is, you do not go back with any real insight or any new knowledge that you did not have. It is only things from your own subconscious, including your fears and hopes and desires. And because they can read right through you into your mind, if you have a trick question, they know exactly what your trick is and can answer accordingly also. And it's so effective. But the point is, they can put on any form. And so the easiest way to trick you is to put on a form that you would trust. So Mother says, it takes the inner psychic purity not to be deceived. You invariably feel something that makes it impossible for you to be duped. But otherwise, many, many people are taken in. She says, I don't like to talk about this because people here have no discrimination. They would be left with nothing but fear and would no longer believe in anything, forever asking me, isn't this a trick? Which paralyzes everything. That's why I didn't speak about it in that talk, Mother says. Satprema tells her, you do say a couple of words about it, Mother. It should at least be mentioned that some beings in the vital world can take on completely deceptive appearances at will. All the most dazzling lights are found in the vital, but with a particular quality. For those who have truly approached the light, can't be deceived. Because it's indefinable. Something the spiritual sense alone can feel. Perfect security, perfect peace, perfect purity. Although I hesitate to use the word purity, which has taken on such an idiotic meaning. What I mean is the absence of all admixture. So what is this idiotic meaning of purity? The common idea that purity is moral purity. I have been all my life following whatever moral expectations of society. In social settings, often you have been pure in your marital life, meaning you have had no other thought of relations with others. So that becomes a kind of a moral purity. So such a person is greatly revered as spiritually great. Although it has nothing to do with spirituality, it is at best a moral function. But these are the wrong ideas of purity with which people then try to mix the spiritual. That's why Mother says idiotic meaning. What she means by purity is the pure sense of the divine consciousness or the psychic touch without mixture with these vital desire, passion or impulses. She continues, to those with the spiritual sense, the most dazzling vital lights always seem to have something artificial about them. They feel artificial and cold, hard, aggressive, deceptive. But that's the point. You yourself must be beyond all this. Not to be fooled, you mustn't fool yourself. Interesting. The idea is, as long as there's a part within you that deceives yourself, you're putting your own desire as, this is a spiritual need or inspiration, you've deceived yourself internally, How will you distinguish when the external vital form puts up the same deception? So you see, the core idea behind this, in order not to be deceived by external appearances, you must internally be completely sincere. In other words, transparent, honest, not self-deceptive to yourself. And of course, have the touch of that experience, of that which is true, against which this appears obviously to be false, fake, hard, cold, or somehow deceptive. And Mother continues, actually, that's the main reason I don't like to talk about occultism. It puts people in touch with an extremely dangerous world which can't be safely entered. Unless one is, I can't even say a saint because it's not true. Some saints enter the vital world and get right into it. Unless one is transformed. Unless one has the true spiritual consciousness. On this condition alone are you perfectly safe. So, where are the people with the spiritual consciousness? Mother says. There are really very few of them, very few. And above all, in those who have this occult curiosity, there are all sorts of vital movements which make it dangerous for them to enter the world, to enter that world. Unless, of course, they go shielded by the Guru's presence. With that, you can go anywhere. It's the same as going there with him. And if you do go with him, all is well. He has the knowledge and he protects you. But going there all on your own is, you need the divine protection itself. Now, example of this, safely going, is when Mother took Huta. We took some examples of that last few times. She took Huta into those domains. There was even a very, very interesting experience when Huta had to draw the paintings which involved Satyavan facing the god of death, or Savitri facing the god of death who has taken Satyavan's soul. Mother said to Huta, well, you can't paint god of death unless you've met him. So Mother said to her, I'm going to send him to you tonight. So imagine Huta's experience. She says that night she lay down in her bed and suddenly there was this presence, and then there were feet walking around, stomping in her room, going all around her bed, and she was terrified. Of course, this was one experience, but then there were other experiences where she was taken into those worlds and shown things. And then Mother said, now with that experience of that consciousness, you will paint and give to it that form. But full protection. And Huta knew because of that relationship she had, the protection was there, she could meet anything and she knew it was safe. But you know, when Mother says Guru, it's not the same thing. Just because you consider somebody a Guru doesn't mean the person has the knowledge or the power to have that kind of protection. That's why Mother says, finally, you need the divine protection itself, or the Guru, or the protection of the Guru who represents the divine. With the Guru's protection, you're safe. Now here's an interesting question. Satprem asks, but isn't it possible to have a fruitful collaboration with those beings? Should they be avoided altogether or what? Mother says, collaboration, not with them as they are, and not in the world as it is, no. I have told you about my dealings with the Lord of Nations, that is the Asura of falsehood. I've told you of my dealings with the Lord of Nations on several occasions. It's that kind of thing. It can hardly be called collaboration. The great ones know, I'm not speaking of the multitude of minor beings, but the others, there are millions of emanations by the truckload, but only a few great ones. You see the beings at the top, and then there are millions of emanations. They know enough to be aware of their own position in the universe, and that they will come to an end. They know that. They know there is such a thing as the Supreme, although they deny it, and that they are cut off from the Supreme, and that they will come to an end. But they have taken a stand against the work, the action, the progress, and are intent on destroying as much as they can. Some of them get converted. Their conversion means a great entity joining the divine work, but that seldom happens. And then Satprema asks, but what about the minor gods? You often speak of a little Kali or a little Durga. Are these beings beneficent? This is in context of what Sri Aurobindo is describing, these beneficent and maleficent. Mother says, they aren't from the vital at all, not at all. They are manifestations of overmind beings projected into the vital world for a specific action. But they aren't vital beings. They have an origin. They are still linked to a being from another world. Oh no, not at all. The same goes for all those beings the tantrics deal with. Their origin is not vital. They belong to nature. They are personified natural forces obedient to the laws of nature. In other words, they originate from below, not from the vital, but the physical world. They are vital forces in the physical, but not of vital origin. The other day, didn't I tell you the story of those entities working for me? It wasn't you, I had vision. In fact, I very often see entities like nature spirits when I enter the subtle physical and work there. Usually for people here and the ashram and for the world at large. I very, very often have them with me, or else I meet them in the course of my work. They are forces, generally feminine in appearance, that do some work and have a great deal of power. They are usually the ones that respond to tantric invocations. I don't mean the tantrics who call on Kali or Durga, that's something else altogether. Those belong to a totally different world. Most of the time these nature forces are willing to help. At any rate, they are wonderfully obliging with me. But they are limited beings with their own ideas and laws, their own volition, and when vexed they can do unpleasant things. Yet they are not hostile beings, nor are they vital beings. They are personified forces of physical nature in the subtle physical. And then Mother says, a world of things could be said. And after a silence she says, no, I don't know if it's wise to publish this talk. Well, now it's published, so. If too incomplete, it looks like ignorant chatter. And I've always deliberately refused to say things in full, since it's so very disconcerting for people. Very disconcerting. So maybe I skip the rest of it. But you can see how Mother had quite a very active life, aware of all these different domains and the beings on these different domains. And the distinction she makes is very interesting. And in the last part of this talk, she says, even when I was practicing occultism in the most material world, I looked on it from above. There was this sort of inner light, this presence. I was born with it. So naturally I had no problems. But now I am in the thick of this work, I don't want to speak of that. It's too dangerous. That teaching should really be given under the seal of secrecy and given along with the necessary power and discrimination for going through these experiences without danger. And that means the Guru's constant personal care and attention. Certain stages of your development, that is in the occultism, even require the Guru's physical presence. You must no longer go into trance unless he is there sitting beside you. Out of the question. Can't you just imagine me saddled with loads of people? It's impossible. I couldn't even do the job properly. No, it's impossible. It would simply mean exposing a lot of people to permanent danger, and I don't want to. So I'll put this talk aside. So we skip the rest. So the important thing here is that idea that even the little Durga, little Kali she mentions, they are actually partial emanations from the overmental plane, but not of the vital. And even nature spirits, not primarily vital beings. What's the difference? Nature spirits oversee nature process. Vital beings are primarily beings of desire, and even if they connect with nature processes, the drive behind is of their desire and life force. And so it's an important distinction. As far as we are concerned, perhaps we may not be able to make out the difference, but there you are. The point here is, coming back to the text, in our desire part, there are these influences and touches, and then there are powers, malefic and beneficent. Good desire and evil desire, which concern themselves with us, even when we are ignorant of and unconcerned with them. So now I want to take a look at another talk of the mother, where she mentions how that influence acts on us, particularly this good desire and evil desire. Okay, it's in the other talk. Okay. So here she's speaking of influences from the vital world and what happens when the body is shed and it forms vital entities. So somebody asks, what becomes of the vital being after death? So remember, in the passage of death, you first shed the physical body, then the vital body is also shed. Mother's response, it is dissolved. Rarely does it happen otherwise. But if you have had a very strong passion, if you were divided by fixed impulses, the vital being would break up into small pieces. Instead of going off like a vapor or a liquid, it goes off by little bits. Now, desires, let's say, you have a strong revenge. So and so has hurt me so much, I want to have revenge. Somewhere else there's a strong passion. I need this, want this, I crave this. Now each of those is a strong formation of desire which will as if break out, take on a form of itself instead of dissolving completely. And so she is describing this. Each of these pieces of vital substance is gathered around the central impulse, the central desire, the central passion of that piece, thus creating little entities which don't have a human form but take at times an indefinite form. At times they resemble the body to which the pieces belonged. At other times they take a form expressing the desire they represent. So if it was a desire for revenge, well, what's the form that the revenge will take? I wish I could beat up that fellow. So what's the form it takes? What's the beating up image for you? And it'll take that form. Or just some vague, persistent energy bundle. And naturally, their sole concern is to satisfy their desire or passion, and they search everywhere for the means of self-satisfaction. So let's say my passion or desire for revenge has gone out. It's tied to a particular person or situation. It hangs around. And the moment a human being comes who has a similar resonance of revenge energy, it latches on and drives the person to act what it wanted and creates a conflict. Now, during the time when that thing is happening, if the other person is sensitive, he will look at his attacker and say, oh, there's a quality of energy about you which reminds me of that fellow who died, who wanted revenge. Now, in the popular term, you will say, oh, this fellow was possessed by the spirit of that to have his revenge. No, it's not that. The soul is gone. The energy bundle hung around and seized upon this and dissipated itself through that action. That's about it. But the connection with that person because of the quality of energy or consciousness is unavoidable if you're sensitive. So Mother now goes deeper. Take, for example, the passion of a miser for his fortune. He dies. His vital being is dissolved. But his passion for his money remains alive. It gathers around itself a certain number of elements to form a living and conscious entity in the vital world. If this man has in his lifetime hidden a treasure somewhere, that entity goes and installs itself just above the place where the treasure is, as if to guard it and stop people from coming near it. But there are sensitive people who, when they know that a treasure is hidden somewhere, feel the presence and say, The treasure is there because here you have an entity which is announcing literally by its presence that something is hidden. That is the first effect. The other effect is that the entity, not wanting the treasure to be touched, always brings about some catastrophe to guard its property. It makes those who approach it ill, or it causes an accident, even an assassination. They can kill you sometimes if they're strong enough. And sometimes the method of killing is very simple. They could cause a physical object to trip and fall and kill. You are physically strong, even vitally protected, but a physical tree falling on you. I know a person who was at one point, he entangled himself with somebody who was practicing these occult things. And then after that he said, I came away feeling very weird. And then he said he was walking around in the garden and suddenly a big coconut leaf broke from the coconut tree and fell with a crash exactly in front of him, 1 foot in front. And he said if something had not stopped him from moving, it would have hit his head. So you may be protected in energetically, but physically, it can still harm you. And this is what you see in cases where people enter those, what as they say, cursed treasures. In Egypt, many of the tombs were protected with certain vital beings. With this intention, they would write a warning at the entrance of the tomb, whoever disturbs this will be cursed. And I believe it was in the case of the first opening of the Tutankhamun's tomb or something. There were 5 of those Egyptologists. All 5 died within 2 years. If you look it up on the internet, they will say, oh, but they didn't die because of curse. So-and-so died of accident, so-and-so died of some poisoning, someone else had a heart attack. But that's the whole way the curse works. So curse doesn't mean that you will suddenly see some forms, and it works through processes. Any means is good for it. Or, if the person is very sensitive, it gives him such a fright that he goes mad. There are also lots of little entities, quite repugnant, in very large numbers, which originate from that wretched sexual desire. It's very interesting now. She comes to something quite fascinating. You see, a large part of humanity has the sexual experience primarily as an instinctive drive which is quite crude and coarse. And it is this which is referring to that wretched sexual desire and large numbers of beings. If this desire with its corresponding entities is not dissolved at the time of death, these entities continue to exist, and they come and settle in the atmosphere of sensitive persons to goad them, to egg them on. So let's say a person who had a strong sexual passion and it was not dissolved by the time he has died, it takes on this form, and then it goes and it's looking for some way of exhausting itself. So often in the occult tradition they will say it works out through animals. So some dogs, some donkeys, animals which are aligned to that impulse more easily, it will catch and then exhaust itself. And if it does that, it's good. Which is why even in the Indian tradition they say after somebody dies, for the next 3 days you feed the crow. So that if there are any unexhausted desires of that person, they will be exhausted through the crows, because crows are animals which are primarily desire impulse based. So you give them food and after a while it exhausts and it's gone. But if not, then this is what happens. They come and settle in the atmosphere of sensitive persons to goad them, to egg them on. These entities feed upon the vital force emanated at the time of the act. And naturally their only desire is to get as much nourishment as they can. I've seen people enringed by dozens of these beings. It's a very concrete thing. I don't know if you have heard of Maurice Magret, the writer who had come here. He has said in one of his books that people who have a very strong sexual instinct are surrounded by a swarm of these small beings who plague them to satisfy themselves, to feed upon the vital force. Because at the time of the sexual act, the vital energy which is thrown out is thrown out. It's there in the atmosphere, and these beings come and feed on it. He knew the thing quite well. He had observed it. To those who are ever so little sensitive, it is very perceptible. Even the people who are tormented very often feel that the impulse comes from outside. It arouses something inside them, but they feel that the excitation comes from outside. And there are hundreds of thousands of them. For, unfortunately, it is one of the greatest difficulties of mankind. It is a terrible slavery. I think that's the part where I will leave it. She speaks of other very interesting things, vital nightmares and various other experiences which involve beings. Okay, maybe this we can end with the last one. So someone asks, it is often said in fairy tales that the treasure is guarded by serpents. Is this true? And mother replies, yes, but it is not a physical serpent, it is a vital serpent. The key to the treasures is in the vital world, and it is guarded by an immense black serpent, a tremendous serpent, 10 times, 50 times larger than an ordinary one. It keeps the gates of the treasure. It is magnificent, black, always erect and awake. I happened once to be standing before it. Usually these beings obey me when I give them an order. And I said to it, let me pass. It replied, I would willingly let you pass, but if I do, they will kill me. Who is the they? They are the beings who are the, so to say, owners of the treasure and the serpent itself. They will kill me, so I cannot let you pass. I asked, what must I bring you in order to gain entrance? So generally, wherever you have a guardian of a gateway, there is a condition by which he allows you. It said, oh, only one thing would oblige me to give way to you. If you could become master of the sex impulse in man, if you succeeded in conquering that in humanity, I could no longer resist, I would allow you to pass. Very interesting. You will recall Sri Aurobindo's comment about these three powers, money, sex and power being intertwined in the hands of the Asura, and somehow there's this interconnection between these three. It has not allowed me to pass, mother says. I must admit that I have not fulfilled the condition. I have not been able to obtain such a mastery of it as to conquer it in all men. That is quite difficult. So, all of this comes back to what we're discussing about good desire and evil desire, beneficent and maleficent powers, which concern themselves with us even when we are ignorant of and unconcerned with them. So what does it mean? So much of the desires which we find suddenly catching us are actually coming from outside, from these beings. Even good desires may come from outside and seize upon you. I suddenly today feel like going out and being generous or doing something good. Okay, where did it come from? It did not come from your soul or your psychic being. It did not come from some deeper, freer part of you. It was perhaps a positive impulse from a positive being or positive desire which caught you and said, okay, let's do some good. That's all. The quality of the goodness that comes from the soul, from the psychic being, is fundamentally different. It does not have the character of impulsiveness or the desire character. The desire-based good, having done its good, will have, because it's desire, it has a positive negative side always, will have a sense of expectation, of reward, of recognition, of return of some kind. And depending on your nature, it will try to take it back by force if needed. I have done you so much good, you must now declare what a good person I am, or how grateful you are, or you must give me something in return. And if the person is a strong, vital type, often such people are very successful in transactional relationships. They will give, but they will take back in other ways. And they cannot give without taking back. And if they can, they will take back more than they give, even if it is in a different form. So I may give physically, but I'll take back psychologically. That's the way it works. Or take back in terms of owning you or owning your allegiance. Hereafter you will do whatever I say. It takes various forms depending on the type. More refined vital will have it. But always desire-based goodness will have this other side. The true psychic goodwill, it simply gives acts, it has a spontaneous generosity because it sees the same one divine in all. And its relationship is with the divine, and of course there can be no expectation or compulsion or taking back of any kind. It does what it does for the divine as a form of consecration, service, self-giving, and it finds its joy in that. And that's it. And it has none of the characters of desire, the impulsiveness, the insistence, the pushiness, etc. But for you to be able to feel that, the goodness of that, one must literally make the vital completely quiet and still, to allow the goodness of the psychic to come forward and infuse into the vital and activate its goodness or lead its goodness. And if this can be done, you will find such a vital, sufficiently sensitized or psychicized, will feel very uncomfortable when an outside impulse comes in, even if it is a good impulse. I have this urge for goodness, but the character of that urge is so coarse compared to the refinement of the psychic influence that lifts and leads in consecration. And you'll say, yes, I know it's a good thing, but I let go. I dissolve the desire impulse. I may still do the good, but without that mix which comes with the vital. So this is to dwell upon the influences which Sri Aurobindo is describing, which come into our life part primarily. And that's why the purification of our life part is so important. So I reread this sentence. From that vital world, the life part of us, the desire part, is always touched and influenced. There too are there in that world, there too are beneficent and malefic powers of good desire and evil desire, which concern themselves with us, even when we are ignorant of and unconcerned with them. If you observe children playing, and in the play somebody gets upset, first he is upset, and then suddenly he's seized with anger, and suddenly he goes. You can catch, literally, you can see the vital impulse getting, seizing, possessing, and exhausting through the person. It was not in the person, it came in from outside. And it's very disturbing when you see it happen. And if it is not corrected in early childhood, it can become a habit in the vital nature for the rest of the life. I've seen this also take another form. Sometimes it comes as a suggestion. And this young man told me, whenever I'm talking to somebody, suddenly I get this urge or this idea of poking him in the eye. I don't know what it is. I can't help it, but it keeps coming up. He doesn't realize that it's a suggestion coming from outside. And to the extent that he has accepted it as his own, it gets a force, it gets a persistence, and then even a habitual form. If he recognizes it's from outside, he can actually create at least some kind of protection. It takes various forms. What they call obsessive compulsive disorder as a medical illness often has this kind of a vital nudge behind, an entity or a being which has hooked into you and is making you do. You don't want to do it. You can see how silly it is, but you cannot prevent yourself from doing it. And the being has great fun. Oh, I made this fellow do something so silly, made him a slave, made him stuck into a routine. And what do they do for that psychiatric intervention? They give you medicine, which does what? Dulls you. Dulls the part of your nervous system responsive to these intrusions from outside. That's why they're effective. But in the process, they dull everything. All your emotions, all your sensations, all becomes dull. Life becomes insipid. You feel nothing, neither happiness nor sadness. And you live in a kind of a mechanical, physical life. And that's what it would be like if you did not have the joy that the vital being brings into your physical body. It dulls that whole connection, dulls the vital influence in the physical itself. And then the person is unhappy because they don't want to feel like that, numb. You bring back, you remove the medicine and numbing, you bring back that, and with it comes also that influence. What it shows you is your vital being is naturally open to all these influences from the vital world. And it needs a cultivation of the vital to make it conscious and to refuse these impulses which are not in tune with your deeper or higher reference. If not a mental idea, at least a deeper, some psychic influence, or even your sentimental goodness, whatever your reference point. So there's a purification and culturing necessary to prevent or make you conscious of such things. And then he goes to the next. Nor are these powers merely tendencies, inconscient forces, nor, except on the verges of matter, subconscient, but conscious powers, beings, living influences. So what is he saying? The two parts to it, what they are not and then what they are. So let's look at what they are first. First of all, he says they are conscious. That means they have their own will, they have their own volition, they have their own drives. Made of what? Made of the particular quality of desire bundle that they are formed of. So if, as the earlier passage we saw, it was the sexual impulse, well, it's seeking that. If it is the anger or vengeance influence, it's seeking that. Or it can be complex desires. And that is very interesting to know, to observe. It can be a desire which is to make this thing work, to make this happen. Now, unknown to us, we are constantly creating desire energies of this kind in the very act of trying to do something. Let's say you've set yourself a goal that you want to create, for this purpose, a business. A business in which you're going to create certain types of clothing, let's say, which you will be selling, and the clothing will have a certain power of attraction, they will fulfill a certain need, and whatever the purpose. Again, the grade at which you target makes a big difference. If the line of clothing is tapping into the most crude, coarse, let's say, sexual attraction, it will be of a different type and the business will have a different grade of quality of energy. If the same line of clothing is tapping into a more refined and aesthetic attraction, it will create a different kind of energy in the whole business space and the transactional experiences it will have. What is interesting to see is people who work there often align with that quality, and the people who come as customers align with that energy, and of course the founder aligns most with that energy. So the same clothing line, the same business may have completely different gradations of what they represent in terms of the vital purpose. But the person creating it has put already a huge intention of that energy, which creates resonances, pulls those people, pulls those energies, pulls that kind of clientele, creates a whole energetic pattern in the world. Desire-based, impulse-based, and it works at that grade. The question is, what will help humanity in its evolution? Well, obviously higher types, uplifting movements, but the other types also exist, and often, because they are the most base, they often have the widest access or pull in humanity, especially for a humanity which is semi-degenerate. So it's interesting, you will see, you're walking on the road, let's say there's a line of shops, you're walking on the road and suddenly you find yourself pulled to look at and an urge to enter a shop. You may say, oh, I chose of my own free will to go. No, you're a puppet. From that space, there's a current of energy of desire coming out, trying to hook at everybody that comes. Whoever passes by, if it can get a hook on you at its level of vibration, it pulls you. So, going through near a shop like that, which is quite coarse, you go, you get pulled, and then you feel, it feels weird. I'd rather not enter in. But the pull acted on you. But the other parts kicked in. It feels weird, you move on. But still there's a curiosity, and sometimes a morbid curiosity. What is it that's so attracting? Somebody else who's on that level will just go in, end up making a huge purchase and walk out. But if you see the quality of consciousness of the general populace, and if this is too crude compared to the general populace, it won't be too successful. At least it won't last. If it matches the general populace, the numbers will match. And so you will see often the successful businessmen are those who tap into what is the need of the largest collective. They plug into that, tune into that, and create a structure which pulls there. But the energy which is thus created in the business for its success is a conscious energy and has its own persistence. Once created, it is now self-sustaining. The owner may die, go away, sell it off, but the formation created continues and defines now the company, its values, and even the consciousness of the people working there. It becomes a self-sustaining energy impulse, desire-based. It owns the business. It is even in some way the character of the business and its success or failure for that matter. So what you recognize is that these are conscious powers. In this case we could say an accumulated power, or beings where they are already conscious beings, or sometimes a being which comes to preside over this formation as one of its emanations, or it enters it and takes it up as its mission. Any of these could happen. Living influences. And so as living influences, they exercise constantly an active movement. You could go, for example, to a place which is now a desert town. You walk into a shop, you can feel the life force of what was done there, if you're sensitive. But you'll also notice if the town is deserted, the life force there has diminished to such an extent that it has no more any effect. And that's the reason why it's a desert town. Nobody wants to come there. The vitality there has dissipated or has moved away. You bring the vitality back, bring that conscious being or power or living influence, reactivate it, suddenly people will be attracted to come and settle there. Interesting. If you're starting a project, depending on the quality of consciousness which inspires and enlivens it, it will attract people to it or not. But this is the case even of spaces including towns. You will see in many places in the world today, there are still what they call ghost towns, because no human being wants to go there. Somehow that energy has dissipated. In the Indian tradition, they have particular rituals associated with creating or accumulating goodness. So when they start a project, they will do a ritual, a havana, invocation, invoking some high inspiration, some higher power, energy, depending on the nature of the havana, for the purpose of creating precisely this formation of energy. But what is there is a living influence. It has then to be nourished and nurtured. And if people come there and start working and enthusiastically expressing what it has, it feeds the energy, builds the energy, and helps it to grow. In practice, over time, there is even an individuality which develops. And I think Sri Aurobindo makes reference to this. He says, many of the very old institutions even have a presiding being which has a human-like form, or at least can be seen in human-like form. And he gives the example, I believe it was of Oxford University perhaps, where he says there's even an aged being, old being which presides over that, which is as if the sum total of the people who have lived there, worked there to fulfill that ideal. And so the being naturally is a more philosophical, knowledge-based being. It will have a certain vital component, but it is much more largely a mental being with some vital component than primarily a vital being. Whereas mostly in transactional places, it will be a vital being. Now, having understood this, we can see positive vital energies and beings developing whole movements, building entire communities, building businesses, building clubs, networks, even things like the Rotary Club or Lions Club have behind it certain presiding powers which are formed by the people joining, or even sometimes by the original people who formed the movement and then fed now by the people who are part of it, and so on. But now consider what may happen where people go for some of the most base activities, where people go, let's say, to a tavern to get drunk. And that creates a very different kind of vibe. But again, it's a conscious energy. So it will even attract you. I'm going to touch upon this now in a different way. This is the experience of a friend of ours. He occasionally had the need to smoke, and that went away eventually. But during that phase when he had it occasionally, he would still do it instead of fighting it, purifying the movement. And one day it so happened he was visiting a place in Europe. He went to a place which was a spiritual community where strictly nobody smokes. So a pretty large space, more than 120 people. He stayed there for a day, and suddenly he says, standing there, he said, I had the most intense urge to smoke. In the whole of my life, I had never such an intense urge. Very interesting. He says, what is this? And the person from that community said, yes, because the spirit of the smoking impulse only finds you to exhaust itself. There's nobody else in the community. Very interesting insight. You see, so there's a force behind the addiction. All addiction, behind it is a force. Whether it's smoking, alcohol, drugs, there's a presiding being, maybe at a large scale behind the whole plant, if it's a psychedelic plant or drug, or behind that particular source, whatever. We need not look at that too much in detail now, but there's a force of addiction. The force reaches out into you. It's got a hook into you. It reaches out into you and awakens the urge. And so suddenly you're sitting there reading a book, quite happy, and suddenly the urge pops up. Hey, where did this come from? And you say, oh, go away. It keeps seething, it pushes, nudges, and after a while it becomes obsessive. Oh no, I need to have that. It pulls you towards the object where it's kept, forces you to go and buy it or whatever. You can't help it. And the withdrawal symptoms are of what? A withdrawal of the force, not choosing to let it go. It's a kind of possession in a very narrow band, not choosing to let go and you struggling. That's what creates the reactions of people having withdrawal symptoms. But there's a force. And especially in a culture where smoking is so normal, the force is prevalent everywhere you go. And now here's a patch where nobody is smoking and the force doesn't have much entry. And one person gets in who has still like a residue left. And the force says, yes, and whoop, it surges there with full intensity. Now, I'm giving this example because it helps us understand so many things where we end up blaming ourselves, we end up feeling bad, say, oh, I am like this, I am not good enough, I'm not good enough, I have this problem. Not really. Your only problem is a part of your desire nature which is open to a particular grade of vibration of desire which is out there in the universe and anyway moving around looking for new victims or new points of exhausting or exercising its urge. And if you could somehow purify that or erase that impulse or pattern within you, it'll have no hook. It's not you, it's rather this impulse from outside and which is perhaps part of the universe. It's in this way also that sometimes people use occult interventions to boost their business deals. I'll give an example of a person who narrated this to me. He was in touch with someone who did these magical incantations, and a friend of his wasn't having sales. So they approached this man, the man had certain conditions, he did his thing, and immediately the next day the sales shot up. So they asked him, what did you do? He says, I did nothing. Of course, there's a being involved. But there are people looking for this, and you're providing it. I only brought the two in connection. Who, of course, he didn't do it, the vital being did it. But what was his requirement? In return, the vital being needed something from them, which was the vital energy, the vital fluid of their body. He had a strong sexual urge, and it was through that the vital being got its energy in return. So very crude course, very nasty, but very effective. Because it's tapping into that grade of vibration. Desire impulse, desire need, and poof, aligning the two, it takes care of itself. A lot of this goes on in the world unconsciously. A lot of it happens consciously. Even in things which we are not aware of, when there are very big events, World Cup football, finals, or even at earlier stages where there's so much at stake, many of the players get involved with this kind of connecting to powers, energies, calling for their interventions, sending negative attacks against the other. asking for positive help for their success. And if you look at a very simple human event which has a lot of human interests, you'll find all these energies tying in, positive, negative, and all kinds, plugging into, pulling, pushing, a whole chaotic confusion. And we're puppets in their hands. Compare this vital chaos and confusion with the action of a spiritual force. The spiritual force acts from above. It knows everything. And all it does is it aligns the consciousness. No desire impulse, no compulsion of that kind. It simply aligns. And here was a need, here was a requirement. It moved and smoothly flowed. No reactions, no chaos, no confusion, none of that agitation which is typical of the vital mixes and the reactions and counter actions and counter reactions, whole complex chain of confusion. None of that. Clear, simple, direct, pure light, bringing things into awareness, bringing clarity in simplicity. Mother also helped sometimes. It was one of the devotees who was a filmmaker, Tarachand Barjatia, and his sales were going down. He called up the mother, sent a telegram, "Mother, sales are down." So mother receives the telegram and she says, "Okay." And next day telegrams come, "Sales have shot up, thank you." That's the action of the spiritual force, not tapping into the vital desire and alignments, and therefore no chain reaction of karmas, which is typical of the vital. The nature of a vital action is, in the very action is the reaction, and in the reaction is a further complication of reaction to reaction and so on, always increasing confusion. The nature of spiritual action always bringing unity, harmony, alignment, clarity, and it's always simple, direct, and uplifting. Everybody grows, no karmic negation or negative reaction. So what Sri Aurobindo is telling you here is something very important. These are conscious powers, beings, and living influences. What they are not merely tendencies. Yes, they are tendencies also. They're not merely inconscient forces. Those also are there, especially when you come very close to matter. They are subconscious forces. But behind that, there are conscious powers, beings, and living influences which can go quite a way down into even these as tendencies and unconscious or subconscious forces. But behind there are always living, conscious beings and powers. And now you see your picture of the world is so much more complex. There's the physical world, there's the vital world, and then there are all these interactions from the vital to the physical and the backwash from the physical to the vital. And now we'll connect the vital to the mental and the mental to the vital and the mental to the physical and all the multiple planes in between them which are also working. Everything is one big complex unity of interwoven phenomena. What holds it all together is the spiritual. The one consciousness which knows it all and can intervene with an action in perfect alignment with all, and therefore no negative consequence or karmic result, is the spirit. Anything else acting in between, even a mental push, because it is a fragment meeting another fragment, there is action and there is reaction, and then there is chain of reaction. But the self, when it acts, it moves from the whole, including all, and when it acts as if everything is put in alignment spontaneously, smoothly, no reaction. And it is in this sense that the Bhagavad Gita teaches you that when an action is done from the spiritual consciousness without any personal expectation or personal impulsion, as a conscious instrument of the divine, there is no karma. And any action, even the most extreme, even the most drastic, as it acts from that poise of consciousness, there is no karmic consequence. And so Sri Aurobindo now moves to conclusion. As we awaken to the higher planes of our existence, we become aware of them as friends or enemies, powers which seek to possess or which we can master, overcome, pass beyond, and leave behind. So now he says, actually we become conscious of these, we develop relationships with these things, of course not with the lower vital, but as far as possible with the higher ranges of powers. There are powers, for example, for art, for music, and we develop a relationship. A musician, for example, consciously invokes the highest inspiration that he can conceive of or that he can reach. And there are conscious beings who say, here's a wonderful instrument, I would like to manifest something beautiful through them. And you develop a relationship. You become familiar with those aspects, beings. And if you get into it in more detail, in the knowledge of music, in India particularly, there are the raga. The raga is a particular pattern of music. As the way it's described is only a certain pattern of notes, but behind that is a presiding consciousness of a conscious being. And in one of the early trainings of the raga, they teach you the character of that being, they describe the being, they invoke that particular vibration of consciousness, and you develop as if an empathy, and by empathy a kind of a conscious relationship, and then eventually a mastery. And then the raga just flows through you and the power of the raga manifests. We're short of time, maybe we'll take this up next time. But there is the example of the Deepa raga, the raga of the flame. And there's a famous incident in history where I believe it was Tansen was asked to sing the Deepa raga, and it was a trick. The king challenged him. It was a trick because when you sing, the goal of this is you invoke the flame and unlit lamps catch flame spontaneously. And if you can do that, of course, you have the mastery over the flame, you're demonstrating the mastery, but on the other hand, the fire in you becomes so intense, the heat can burn you up and you can fall sick. So the king challenges him to do that, and of course he does it, he successfully lights the flames, and then he rushes out. I don't remember in the story whether he invokes or somebody else invokes the rain, and there's the cooling influence equally. But literally one experiences these as conscious beings, develops, as Sri Aurobindo says, a relationship is possible, and powers which are friends or enemies, powers which seek to possess or which we can master, overcome, pass beyond and leave behind. So the true masters are those who have mastered each of these secondary powers and gone on to the higher consciousness, of which these are special aspects or emanations. And from that freedom they now transcend even these specialized aspects and spontaneously act. So some of this we will touch in more detail. It gets us to the more beautiful side, not only of the vital but also other ranges. It is this possible relation of the human being with the powers of the life world which occupied to so large an extent European occultism, especially in the Middle Ages, as well as certain forms of Eastern magic and spiritualism. All of those things, they are concerned with the realm of the vital and its connection with the physical. The point of the discussion is that they are not in themselves spiritual and do not have a spiritual value. They may have a great value for human life, at least on the negative side to recognize those influences, on the positive side to encourage the higher uplifting influences, beautifying influences. But it is from here that many of the great art and music also come. Of course, the highest is from the spirit and not from the higher vital. But some of this higher realm and the possibilities involved with that, we will explore next Friday. And meanwhile, we can take up any comments or questions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But these, I like so much, so much, so much. They organize for me some concerts
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
sometimes.
Yes.
My question is about so many kids and teenagers are addicted to computer games. What is there behind that addiction? Is it just a mental thing or is it physical?
So, generally speaking, the nature of the addictive behavior is that you cannot control yourself. It's as if something else seizes you and controls you, at least in relation to that one particular thing. You will also notice the pattern of the addiction, it activates often at the same time or within certain conditions. So, if the person is addicted to a particular behavior at a particular time, it suddenly kicks in. And if you somehow manage to cross the threshold of that time, it goes away, it stops bothering. So it has such a distinct character of its own, of its own independence, that intuitively one senses it's not yours. But if one could look behind, one would find the grade of the addiction. Inevitably, if it has that kind of persistence, it has a vital character, even if there's a mental component to it. The game may be so mental, but the addictive component is the vital. If you removed the vital, there would be no addiction. There would be a mental interest or no interest, the pure mental. So this is more interesting, less interesting, but the thing that pulls is inevitably the vital. What has happened today is that everywhere in the whole field of advertising, in the whole field of sales and marketing, this vital component has been brought in with such a force, and a lot of study which has gone behind to identify the weak points in human nature and how to cut through the normal barriers of your mind to hook into the vital and pull it. It's been made into a perfect art almost. In advertisements, for example, of alcohol, if you look very carefully, the liquid flow inside the bottle which is shown to you, if you look carefully inside the liquid flow, you will see human forms. And precisely the forms which are intended to tap into your lowest basal instincts. And it takes two forms. It can be, for example, sexually exciting forms, or it can be even forms which are almost devilish. But they provoke the lower vital. And so you're looking at a picture where your mind thinks it's just the bottle, and it can be beautiful sometimes. But at a subliminal level, you have been hooked into those energies which have been intentionally planted in the image itself. And intentional planting is from their side the hook reaching out to you, and as a conscious power hooking into you. Now, the same thing can be done with video games. What are the elements by which you would hook? And it can be done subliminally. You may find nothing wrong in the pictures, in the theme, even in the activities. But if there's an element which is addictive, then it has been planted somehow. And one has to often work hard to discover it. There are ways to bypass the conscious mind, and because it's been turned into such a subtle science. One of the earliest experiments in this was what they call subliminal programming, where watching a movie, you had a flickering screen where either 24 or 25 frames per second would be flashing, and your mind can consciously recognize only if the flash is for 1/10 of a second. Now this is going to 1/24 of a second, more than twice the capacity of your conscious mind to recognize. And they would put one frame flashing just once in a while, which will say, eat more popcorn. The result was, whenever they included that frame in the cinema show, popcorn sales shot up. Everybody at the break point would get up, rush and buy lots of popcorn. And one day the film got jammed with that screen stuck, coincidentally. And then people realized that they were being programmed hypnotically, and it was banned. So officially that kind of messaging is banned, but the other kind of messaging, which is more subliminal, is still there. It's being used widely. And that's the reason why people don't realize how quickly there has been a degeneration of values, precisely through this programmed addiction that comes through cinema, advertising, video games, even textbooks. And there's an intention behind which is actually causing a great harm to humanity. The only way humanity can break out is by becoming conscious and being able to stand back and reject the impulse of addiction, which already requires a training, which if you have denied the children at an early stage, the only thing left is the inner being. For those in whom the inner being is conscious, it is able to somehow exercise sufficient influence to break the addiction or even to avoid it thereafter. But it's a difficult passage for all of humanity because of this. Imagine if the same power was used, the same addictive power was used for good, to give people a positive direction, a positive aspiration, and even an attempt to do good and share and help. The same vital could be used and lifted towards the higher ranges of the vital, and you would create a very great and beautiful civilization, not yet spiritual, but certainly for what it represents, it would be something wonderful. Yes. Maybe what I'm saying may not be pleasing to hear, but in my understanding of it, and it's an important question we have to face. In the beginning, when Auroville started, circumstances were far more difficult. Barren land, not even a place to live, not even water to drink, no trees. More people came when Auroville started, with greater enthusiasm, greater will to overcome the hardships, with greater will to adapt to the difficult circumstances and make something beautiful out of it. More people came at that time than are even coming today, when things are so much more comfortable. And there's a reason. Initially, when Mother put out that call, people responded at the level of the soul. It was a spiritual call. People saw, Auroville is starting, this is what we are waiting for. I know of people, they sold their houses, left everything, and came to this, left the comfort to come to this barren land and to create Auroville. Later, this was when the problem started. Later, filters were put. People would come with an intention and they would be told, no, but. Maybe you're not bringing enough money, you're not good enough, you're not spiritual enough, whatever excuse was given. And they were pushed away. And in the process, a contrary force was created to push away. So there's a call which is spiritual, and then there's a push which is vital or physical. And the two are at loggerheads, so to say. And so today what happens is people come, they experience that thing also, which is a formation in the collective consciousness. And the formation can take the subtle form, oh no, we don't want more people. It'll bring more trouble, or maybe they are not good enough, or whatever, some kind of elitism. But the sense in the collective consciousness says, oh no, but, acts as a barricade. So people come, they want to come, but then they face this, and if their inner call cannot cut through this, there is a moment of hesitation or confusion. If that had not been created, perhaps by now numbers would have been far greater, because the pull was already there, it's still there. But this thing is intruding. This is my sense of it. This is what I have felt. I've met many people. Surprisingly, somebody, I was in Europe, we were speaking with somebody in Germany, and I said, but you go, they said they go once a year. I said, oh, but someone like you should be living there. And the lady said, yes, I had applied to join Auroville, and they refused me. I said, why? No reason was given. So many people like that who were called experience this other levels of confusion. I do believe this can be dissolved, but it would mean now consciously recognizing that we want, we invite, and it's not about physical comforts. It's not about whether we have enough housing or money. All of these can be solved. It's about whether we're inviting. And if we just change that shift in the consciousness at these levels, the spiritual call is still there, and I believe the whole thing can be re-triggered. But I leave it as a personal thing, and if I'm wrong, then it's my mistake. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now compare this to another city. Let's say you go to Chennai. The same things, all the negative things you've described would be there in far greater numbers, perhaps. And so already in a space like this, you're far better off. Even if there are aberrations, you're far better off in terms of environment, generally. Second, there is the very strong spiritual pressure, which the mother has established, nothing of our doing. She has established it. That does not care for these things. That can bypass all these things. So what you have as a conducive environment in Auroville, in any case, is far better than anything you would find in any other city. Even in any village where the population density is less, where you might say, oh, atmosphere is more clear because there are less people, but there will not be that spiritual support. So here you have the spiritual support, which is very strong. You have people who are aligned like you, who have that spiritual aspiration, which makes for an extraordinary possibility in a collective space. And then there are the pockets of aberrations. If they were not there, it would be wonderful, but they are there. They cannot neutralize the spiritual. At best, they can introduce a mixture at the level of the vital. But if you have the help of the spiritual, you have the capacity to protect yourself and be free. But if people do not have the discrimination and allow themselves to be sucked into some of those things, well, they would have been far worse off in a different environment. So I'm deliberately highlighting the positive side. And yes, those aberrations should go away. But in spite of them, what you have is so much more valuable and effective. Draw upon that, call upon that help. It can overcome all these things, even in terms of influences in the environment. What is not there is protection for the children. Children can be easily tricked or fooled into negative influences, and they need to be actively brought into positive influences, actively taught of the positive things and the dangers of the addictive or other negative behaviors. And if that is not done, it is seductive for them to get sucked into those types of things. And sometimes a single point of experimentation is enough for the addictive force to hook. That's what happens when people smoke. The first time the body rejects it, reacts violently. But then after that, the hooking takes place and they can't help it anymore. So they have to be taught that this is how it works, and therefore do not make your first experiment. There is no just once. You are hooking yourself into it. And this needs to be told. And this is not being done. Not just in Auroville, it's not being done anywhere in the world. So we need to bring this into the consciously into the education. Yes. 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 Yes, yes. You know, in a sense, we are a miniature world. But it does not justify these things to be acceptable. Because we are meant to be representing the next step in the evolution, at least moving towards it. So, although representing the world with all its problems, the effort should be at least to be able to overcome those problems. And if that's not there, then those are, as I said, the points of aberration. They don't belong in Orville. Or if they're passing through a phase where they're trying to overcome with good intention, then it's okay, that's still acceptable, and then they overcome it. But if the goal to overcome does not exist, then they simply shouldn't be here. And often such people eventually just go away. There is also the automatic protection of the presence that evicts what does not belong here. Mhm. Mhm. Yes. So Mother was very practical. It's not that everybody had to be practicing the yoga or should be in a very concentrated effort, but the first minimum requirement was that they were willing to serve the divine will. And what that means, again, let each one follow what they feel, what it means for them, but there has to be at least that relationship to serve something which represents for you a higher ideal. And if that is not there, then all you're doing is creating another gated community or ungated community, as in this case, and it would not serve the purpose. Of course, initially Mother was very careful about who was admitted. She selected them, she chose people in a certain way. And if we just take basic care that people who come with a conscious aspiration are allowed in, the moment you see that it's there, you don't get too much into details, just that is enough. It would change the whole workspace. The other thing which happened in between was a lot of regulation and rules were imposed, rigidifying, blocking a freer flow of possibilities. And that has been one of the major reasons why there has not been sufficient development. And it's so simple when you look at it. There's a housing crisis, for example. Not enough houses, but there's enough people with enough money to make houses or buy new houses. But there's a rule that says you can only own one. So people are willing to build, willing to put money in, but they cannot because the rule prevents it. And why is that rule? Maybe there was some justification, maybe not, I don't know. The point being, you do not have a lack of resources. You do not have a lack of capacity. You do not have a lack of facility. There's no lack of goodwill. There's no lack of help from outside. Everything is there. The gridlock is only created by some elements of, let's say, human rigidity, fixity, ill will, or not enough goodwill, simply. And just with a little bit of goodwill, everything can very quickly smoothen out and move forward. But it means for each one to make that one reference. Every day you begin with the idea, here you're here to serve a higher truth, value, ideal, divine, whatever form it means for you. And you want to take one more step in everything you do in that direction. Just that is enough. The divine presence is strong enough to work itself out through this, if this little lubrication of our good intention is there. So we'll continue this fascinating passage next Friday, which also happens to be the 14th of June, which is birthday of MP Pandit, who was Mother's secretary and my teacher. We have a special event at his house. You're most welcome to drop in at any time during the day if you like to take prasad. We have a prayer in the morning at 6 a.m., which might be too early, but drop in during the day if you like to.